So Dave Thomas, I'm sure you know him. He's Pragmatic Dave. He's a programmer and author, and also a cornerstone of the Ruby community. He's personally responsible for many of its innovative directions and initiatives. He's a programmer, and now he's an accidental publisher. That's what he wrote, and I feel really uncomfortable saying that. But he wrote Pragmatic Programmer with Andy Hunt at the end of the 90s, as you may know. And that experience opened a new world for them. They discovered a love for writing, and that complemented their love for learning new things. He's also one of the authors of the Agile Manifesto, soon to be replaced by Brandon's Manifesto. And he's responsible for bringing Ruby to the attention of the Western developers with the book Programming Ruby. Okay. He was one of the first, this is really good feedback. I'm improving. It's good. He was one of the first adopters of Rails, and he helped spread the word with the book Agile Web Development with Rails. He enjoys speaking at conferences, running public and private training, but most of all, he loves coding. So please welcome Dave.
All right. Welcome to the 13th annual meeting of Agile Industries, Inc. I really appreciate all of you stakeholders making the time to come and see us. I'd also like to thank security at the door there for keeping developers out of the room. Clearly, we don't want to trouble them with the things that we're talking about here. So, I'm very pleased to present to you the results of yet another year of Agile development. So, I'm going to talk about three things. The history, this is traditional, what I do in my talks. I'm going to talk about the challenges that we at Agile Industries currently face, and then the plan that we have for addressing those challenges. So let's start with a little bit of history. As you know, our industry started with a group of 17 naive, middle-aged white guys meeting in Snowbird, Utah. And these people came up with the absolute perfect basis for an industry. They came up with a set of values and a set of principles, but didn't tell people how to use them. And this gave us the gap that we needed to exploit. The other good thing was that these people were not in general particularly, industry-minded. And so they just gave this away. Again, allowing us to exploit it. Now, it wasn't easy. We had to take what they delivered and find a way to monetize it. So the first step was that they produced this thing that was the Agile Manifesto for Software Development. Now, the word Agile is actually an adjective. You can't sell adjectives, you can only sell nouns. So, the first thing that we had to do was totally corrupt the English language and convert Agile from being an adjective into a noun. Now, I'm pleased to announce that that has successfully been accomplished. So now we have the Agile Alliance. That is not an alliance that is agile, it is the Agile Alliance. So there's a noun. We have people asking questions like, is your team agile? Okay, or what is agile is a quite common blog post. And my favorite of all, how to do agile. The fact that all over the country, English majors are committing seppuku with that doesn't matter, because we can sell it. So this is good. We now have something to sell. So then we actually have to decide what it is we are selling. Well, that's easy. Because the one thing that sells is fear. So, we exploit fear. We go and we build this set of worries around this process. And then we solve that by offering training, consultancy, books, conferences, you name it. Anything where you can go in and say, I can take away your fear. You will sleep better at night. That's easy to do. And we've been doing that successfully since the Agile Manifesto came out. However, in order to make more money, we have to make it look more difficult. And in fact, the Agile folks, these naive people, actually help us out here. If you look just before the Agile Manifesto, we had things like extreme programming. And that had things like spikes. We had iterations. We had all of these weird names. Now we have scrums and we have Kanban, and all of these weird names that people don't recognize, they don't know what they are. And so we can charge an entire week's worth of consultancy just to explain what a spike is. This is excellent news. So the new names really help us. The new success criteria. It used to be, you know, you have a project, you finish it, you deliver it, you're done. Right? But now we have all these little iterations, we have different ways of measuring success. We even have these kind of soft things called retrospectives, all this kind of stuff. So these all have to be taught and then retaught. So this is great. And then last but by no means least, we have this concept of the new roles. Right? No more can we have like architects and designers and all this kind of stuff. No, now we have to have, you know, it's very touchy-feely. We have coaches and we have scrum masters and we have all these different kinds of roles. And again, we have to be able to convince people this is really, really hard to understand. So that only we can go in and explain to the world exactly what this means. Last but by no means least, we have to sell it to developers. Because ultimately developers have to do it. So the first thing we do, well, it's pretty easy, right? Imagine you were back in 2002 and you had been using a rational, unified process. And someone comes along to you and says, hey, do you want to try some extreme programming? You bet! Anything sounds better than the rational process, right? So, people jump on board. And it has carried on since then, right? It's all cool. It's all magic. It's all new tools and it's new techniques and it's all bright and shiny and developers love bright and shiny. Just look at JavaScript frameworks. So, it's clearly very cool. However, there are some developers who don't fall for it. And so round 2 of this is to mock them. And to mock them severely. And I need to call out here as an exemplar of how to do that. The test-driven development, behavior-driven development folks. Because they are experts at making anybody who doesn't follow their practices feel like a fool. Well done. So, success. I think we can look back with some pride over the last 13 years as we have successfully worked on ways to monetize the Agile process. Now, there have been some hiccups along the way. Some of our partners have been just a little bit too open about what we do. So, for example, the Scrum Study folks, our wonderful partners, had a Google AdWords campaign. So, world is adopting Scrum, are you? Unfortunately, they let the cat out of the bag with the second sentence, stop thinking and get certified. We had words about that, and it's all okay now. I'm very pleased to present to you our revenue chart. As you can see, it has shown a healthy growth over the last 10 years. Very, very nice. Although, you'll notice that there is a little bit of a flattening off at the top. And your board is concerned about this. We are not ones to sit back and just, rake in the money. We need to get more money. And so we need to find a way of addressing this. So we had a large off-site meeting in a resort hotel, and we came up with the answer. And I'm very proud to present to you our plan for the future of Agile industries. And that is, we're going to sell to the companies, not to individuals. In the past, Agile has been all about selling to the lower level individuals. And that's fine. And we've managed to milk the $1,200 for 2 days of training out of, well, hundreds of thousands of people. But ultimately, companies have more money. And so we are now going to focus our effort on selling to companies and not to individuals. We're going to do this under the new term, Enterprise Agile. I expect you all to start using Enterprise Agile in your marketing material, on your websites, and when you talk to your potential customers. So, how do you do this? Well, each of you will have to come up with your own way of doing it, but I can show you a few success stories from the past. More than 5 years ago, Craig Lyman came up with this system called Less, and it looks very, very enterprising. Yeah? There are lots and lots of circles and arrows and boxes and little cute people figures. And so this is clearly going to be a very, enterprise thing. You can present this, people go, oh, that looks complicated, I'll have 3. I mean, it takes a while, but they're actually, notice that this diagram actually consists of the same diagram repeated 9 times to make a 10th copy that looks the same as the small ones. So it's a great fractal thing, it doesn't require any work. But the thing that makes this an enterprise model is a little footnote down the bottom with an asterisk that says, additional meetings may be required. I commend this as you develop your own enterprise agile frameworks and consultancies. If you want to see how far we can go and take this model, then obviously we can look at the SAFE. This is the poster child for what we can do and still keep the world agile. Please go out and see if you can make more complicated things that look like this, because the more boxes, the more money. So, going forward, Agile Industries is going to focus on big sales. A strategy for next year is we plan to obsolete a whole bunch of the existing certifications and recertify people. Basically I have produced new books, new training, and obviously new certification courses. We want to expand into non-software fields. So we're going to look at agile retailing and this kind of thing. And finally, we are going to continue to spread fear, uncertainty, and doubt at the enterprise level. Because nothing sells like fear. So, I want to finish by assuring you that the future is agile and the future is profitable. So I want everyone here to get out there and start spreading fear. Thank you.
Oh, wait a minute.
I kind of like doing that because it kind of gives me an opportunity to channel my inner cynic, which I don't normally get. Last time I wore that jacket, in the inner pocket is a order of service for a funeral. So. Is the world that bad? No, but it's getting that way. And it's getting more complicated, and it's getting more difficult to know the good from the bad. There is a lot of profiteering in the Agile industry. But worse than the profiteering, I have nothing against money, but worse than the profiteering is the fact that we're taking what was I still believe, a very valuable term and a valuable set of values, and we're degrading it. And we're degrading it so it doesn't mean anything anymore. And that means we lose the ability to talk about it, we lose the ability to focus on it. And I think that's really bad. So I think it is time to reclaim agility. I think it's time for us to take it back and to start denying the people that tell us how to do it. So let me start by telling you the secret. This is all there is to it. What to do for agility is you find out where you are, you take a small and quick step towards your goal, you adjust your understanding based on what you learn in the process, and then you go back and do it again. What could be simpler than that? Well, what makes this hard is that we have to do this fractally. We have to do this all the time and with everything we do. So it applies to coming up with the overall, quote, architecture of a system. It applies to the naming of variables. It applies in a fractal nature all the way down. And what this means is that in order to be able to do step number 3 there, we have to remember to learn at everything we do. And to learn, that means we have to have some kind of metric to say, is this better or worse? Sometimes that's easy. Sometimes it requires a lot of experience. But if we follow those 4 steps, we are working with agility. There's one other practice, and this is simply that quite often you have a choice. You can do it this way, or this way. So the question is, how do you apply the steps when you have that choice? And my rule is, I look for the way that's going to do the least damage in future. The way that I can undo the easiest if it's a mistake. The one that's more amenable to change. And I follow that path. Because that way, if it's wrong, I can back out quickly and go down another path. And in fact, that actually underlines another really important point. And that is, all of software architecture, all of software design, and pretty much all of software implementation is governed by one metric and one metric alone. And that is, how easy is it to change? So, what does it mean to be agile? I love this little video, so I'm going to show it. This is a little 2-wheeled, it's got like an Arduino or something in it, and it balances itself and goes around in circles, so it's kind of like most of us. But notice in this case, it's dealing with a very rocky environment. It's like handling the fact it gets stuck every now and then. It's really, really smart. Really clever, really cute too. All right. So, how does it do that? Well, when you think about it, here I am, if I'm the body of this guy here, right? And I've got 2 wheels that can drive, all I can do is go forward and back. So, if you imagine I'm balanced absolutely perfectly still, and the wheels aren't moving, then that's fine. But now let's imagine I start to tip slightly forward. What do I have to do? I have to turn the wheels to bring the base back in line with the center of gravity to hold it upright. If I start tipping backwards, the wheels go the other way. So you might think, okay, that's simple then. All I have to do is to work out, if I'm tilting, I drive the wheels in the direction to tilt. If you try implementing that, you end up with a robot that starts off like this and then very, very quickly oscillates and slams itself into the ground. Right? So, over the years, people have come up with ways of dealing with this kind of feedback situation. And the most common way of doing that is using an algorithm called PID, for proportional integrative derivative. Fundamentally, what it does is it takes the error, as in, with the robot, it'll be the tilt, or whatever the error term might be, and it applies 3 transformations to that error. One is it just multiplies the error by a constant. The other is it takes the error and integrates it over time and then multiplies that by a different constant. And the last one is it actually differentiates the error to find out how quickly it's changing and multiplies that by a constant. And those three terms added together give you the correction to apply to your control system. You can think of it as the P term is looking directly at the error, the I term is looking at the history to try and work out, is this a big trend, a small trend, a transient thing, or a long-term thing? And then the derivative is looking at the short-term future. So if I am, coming down really fast, then I know I've got to get those wheels turning quicker to get myself back upright. And I think that PID model is a really great model that we should be applying in our software development as well. It's all part of that feedback mechanism. Right? We learn not just from the error, but also how we get to the error and how significant that error is. One of the things I love about PID is it was actually invented, well, just over 100 years ago. And it was invented to solve the problem of steering ships. So the problem with steering a ship is that, particularly a large one, you turn the wheel and nothing happens. And still nothing happens. And then gradually this big thing starts lumbering around the corner, right? So if you're the helms person on one of these ships, how do you know how to do it? And people get skilled, they get to be able to do it, but they can never describe how they do it. So, I can't remember the man's name, actually went and watched helms people working. And he discovered that they were doing these three things. They were looking at the error, but they were also adjusting for the history and for the rate of change. And based on that, he produced, at the time it was a pneumatic system that had a pneumatic differentiator, a pneumatic integrator, pneumatic adder, and it actually did better than humans at keeping a course. Well, actually, it did better than humans at the rate at which it changed the rudder angle or whatever. And I love that because back when I was consulting, I always used to use the steering of a sailboat as an example of how you should manage things. Because I learned to sail, my girlfriend's father at the time had a sailboat, and we used to go out, and he had the old kind of helm, the stick helm, and I would take control, and I would be doing this all the time, constantly. My arm would ache at the end of an hour of helming, and it would be just constantly going back and forth. He would take the helm, and he would put two fingers on it, and you wouldn't see it move. And yet the boat did straight line. And I think that is how we should manage things. We should aim to manage things. Using lots and lots of little small inputs, or the really big inputs. And again, that PID model helps us to do that. So, why am I here? Well, it's kind of funny, because I have not been talking about agility forever. I mean, I give the occasional talk, but not very many. Because frankly, talking about agility is a bit like talking about ballet dancing. It's like, what is there to say? But I kind of got annoyed. I got annoyed because I went to a conference in India, and I was on the coach from the airport. All the flights into Bangalore get in at like 3 in the morning. So pretty much everybody who was a speaker at the conference got in at the same time. So the conference organized a van to take us all into town. So I was sitting in this van, and behind me were two other speakers who were both Agile consultants, and they were both Agile trainers. And they got to talking about coding. And they said, when was the last time you actually wrote any programs? And one of them said, it must have been about 10 years ago. And the other one said, mine 12 years. Right? Here are people that are teaching developers how to code that themselves can't, they wouldn't be able to program nowadays. And that got me really, really angry. So when I got back, I wrote this Agile is Dead blog post, which is actually my most popular blog post. So that teaches me that being negative and cynical is actually the key to success. And an interesting thing happened. I wrote this blog post, and suddenly, within like a week, I get invitations to conferences to talk about agility. Or death threats, as I kind of call it. And I actually took one up. And I took one up because my wife and I love going to China. And I got invited to the Scrum gathering in Shanghai. And told them why it was all a waste of time. So we're probably not going back to Shanghai. So the interesting thing was that when they sent the invitation email out, they said to me, the theme of the conference is that. And I said, great. And they said, well, it's hard to translate, but it's, don't worry about it. So, not to be daunted, I did some Googling. And so I went to Google Translate and copy and pasted it in. Google Translate came back with Swordsman. And indeed, if you go online and you type that in, you'll find that it is actually the name of a TV series which they translate as a swordsman. And sure enough, the guy on the cover has got a sword, so it must be true. So I thought that can't be right? They can't have an Agile conference whose theme is swordsman, except possibly because they're inviting me over for a particular reason. But so I then thought, okay, maybe I should look at it character by character. So I broke it up and looked at it character by character. And Google Translate said, laugh proud River Lake. Okay, obvious. So it turns out, and in fact my wife actually is learning Mandarin, and she was kind of laughing at me the whole time I was doing this. It turns out that in Chinese there are these phrases, and I'm going to murder the pronunciation, chongyu, which are 4-character phrases that have a meaning. They're an idiom. And typically, the 4-character phrases come from some old story. So there'll be some lesson to be learned in some old story, and they'll characterize that story, not the lesson, but the story, into 4 characters, and then that will be a word that stands in for the meaning of the story, right? So it's an idiom. And this particular idiom, apparently it's kind of like a bit dodgy because it's not old, it's a fairly new one. But the idea of this proud river lake thing is that in olden times, rivers were dangerous places because of all the traffic that went up and down the rivers. There were a lot of thieves and pirates and things on the rivers. And that, therefore, if you're going down to the river, it's actually kind of like a scary thing to do. So the idea was you have to be stand proud and be firm in the face of these intimidating people. So I thought, okay, I'm going to try and do my best to communicate with my audience. So I thought, okay, I'll show them we have the same kind of concepts in English. And stylish as always, I decided to translate that as don't let the turkeys get you down. And then, of course, I had to translate turkey, which, by the way, is really cool. The Chinese characters for turkey are fire chicken. Get you down is fairly straightforward, okay? So I explained all that. And then I said, okay, so don't let the turkeys get you down is kind of like, some people think they're more important than they are, right? Some people try to influence you when they shouldn't. Don't let them tell you what to do. In retrospect, that may have been a bit of a controversial thing to do in China, but I actually borrowed a shirt from my son, which I just thought was like a nice pattern. It was a black shirt with kind of like patterns on it. I didn't really look too hard at it. Turns out the patterns are actually American flags. So again, that was how I was Anyway, so don't let the turkeys get you down. And then my next slide in Chinese said, I'm a turkey. Because it's true. I am one of those people that potentially gets you down. In fact, all, quote, experts are turkeys. You know, they say that, the key to public speaking is to think of your audience being naked, which I have never understood because, maybe if you didn't talk to technical people, that would be different. But okay, so maybe the key to dealing with consultants is to think of them as turkeys. I don't know. Because as turkeys, we go around, we tell you what to do. Yeah? We say to you, you should do this, you should do testing. You should run scrums, you should have stand-up, whatever it might be. We tell you what to do. And worse than that is we tell you how to do it. Right? We manage you down to the day-to-day level. Now, that is attractive to a certain kind of management, which is why it sells. But it's a damn stupid thing to do. And worst of all, we give you rules. Right? We say, this is what must be. And all of those three things are wrong. And they are wrong for a wonderfully self-contradictory reason. No rules are universal. Except this one. But no rule can be universal. Because every rule is contextual. And until you understand the context, you can't start applying rules. And quite often, you won't be able to understand the context until you start doing things in that context. So anybody that says to you, you must do testing, is an idiot. Anyone who says to you, don't do all the specs up front, is an idiot. Anybody who says to you anything about how you should do your work is an idiot. Because unless they know all of the context, they can't tell you. They're not qualified to tell you. And you shouldn't listen to them. But if you say that, then typically people will say, well, what do we do then? All right? We're going to do this, all ourselves. How do we know what to do? And here is the most cheery slide in the entire deck. You don't know what to do. You never know what to do. You cannot know what to do. Because unless you've done this before, you have no idea what to do going forward. Right? This is all new. Every day, all of us break new ground. We try new things. We learn new techniques. We solve new problems. We don't know what to do. And when you don't know what to do, you do this. You explore. You take little steps. You experiment. You try things out. And that is what it means to be agile. And that is how you develop with agility. You cannot take an off-the-shelf solution, bring it in and say, okay, we're done. You cannot bring in a consultancy that has one way fits all and say, we're done. It's always going to be an iterative learning process. So, Agile, I think the word is dead. I think the word Agile has become meaningless. So I try very hard now not to say Agile, but instead to use agility, because it's harder to corrupt the word agility. So I try to do things with agility. I ask you all to do the same thing, because the solution to this problem, I think, is in this room. And the solution uses one of Kent Beck's original 4 values, practice, I can't remember what he called them, of courage. It may seem strange that to be a developer you have to be courageous, but you do. You are already courageous. Because honestly, coming in and facing that blank editor buffer takes a form of courage. It really does. I'm not being facetious, it really does. Right? Developing stuff new, saying, yes, I can get this to work, based on just pure intellect, that takes courage. I'm asking you to apply that courage in a bigger situation. What's back? Today is, no it's not.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
No, it's good.
Today is clearly a technical day for me. So I'm asking you to apply that courage in a more social situation, in a bigger situation. Because I'm going to ask you to push back. I'm going to ask you to say, I understand what it means to be agile, to have agility. I know how to do this. I need your support to do this. But I don't necessarily need a $100,000 consultant coming in and telling me what to do. Yeah, I may need help, I may need some training, I may need whatever. But I know the basics, and I'm going to get this done. And that is going to take courage. I want you to remember that agile is not what you do. Agility is how you do it. And that's the important thing to remember. There's nothing sacred about a word like agile. What is sacred is what you do on a day-to-day basis. So, let me end on a motivational note. Nope. I try to end all of my talks with this. Software development is hard. It's difficult. You all know what it's like to come home at the end of a long day and be tired, physically tired from coding. Right? It's wearing. And to do something like that day after day after day for your entire life, if you're not enjoying it, you should be doing something else. Right? Just not paying back. So make it a principle that you need to find ways to make this fun. Cool. Thank you very much. We have some time.
Questions?
Back here. Got one back here.
One there.
Double team for the mics, how nice. Dave, great speech, thank you very much. Quick question though, you used the word goal a couple of times in there. And the real question I have behind this, sort of reductionist almost, is where do the goals come from?
What was the context of goal?
Goal was, it was your second or third slide, moving towards your goal.
Oh.
And then towards the end you also use the same kind of phrasing. And sometimes it's hard to know what the goal is. And I'm curious to know how we move agility thinking up towards goal setting.
Really good question. Okay, so my personal take on this is that the discovery of goals is actually part of that loop. It's kind of sort of like fractally nested. So outside the development loop, no, not outside it, but around it is this idea of discovery and goals and everything else. The previous talk actually mentioned the idea of discovering whether or not your idea was a good idea by doing the minimum necessary to get something out there and trying it. And that's that kind of idea we're talking about as well. So, in terms of discovering goals, you need to say, okay, what's the smallest step I can take to discover if this is actually a goal or not? Yeah? So, I mean, you've got to start from somewhere. You have to start because somebody says, hey, wouldn't it be a good idea if elephants could fly? And then you've got to say, okay, well, if that was to happen, then I have to do this, this, and this. Of these four things, which is the one that will tell me the most about whether or not this is a good idea? And then once you discover that, then you can say, what's the smallest thing I can do to implement something to see if it does actually help? And then, nest on down. So I think the idea is that the goal initially always comes from somebody somewhere saying, we need this. But then the actual goal itself has to be broken down iteratively to make sense. Down to the...
Yes, it's totals all the way down.
It is indeed totals all the way down.
Sorry. I was wondering if you could speak to the opportunities in 2015 for Agile as a service in the cloud.
I think that the 2015 Agile in the Cloud is an incredibly great initiative. It gives us scalability while also giving us fault tolerance, distributability, and location independence. So I'm 100% for it.
Yes, Ben, could you share your thoughts on your interpretation for being a mindful developer? What I mean by that is, I'm an avid Ruby developer, and I'm not going to use the word terminology Rails, because sometimes Rails community, they take what's popular at the time instead of looking at that solution and seeing if it's the best way. Being a mindful developer, I think, will get you further than being a mindless developer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's two aspects to that. I think one is to be a humble developer. The Rails community got where it is because it basically had a damn the torpedoes mentality. Right? So it didn't care whether or not what it was doing was right. It just worked. And so the first couple of versions of Rails, I mean, they got things out incredibly quickly. I mean, David basically had read one book, and then and it's all Martin's fault. And he based a whole bunch of stuff on that book. Right? And he chose like a couple of patterns and implemented them. And that's like, the way it came about. The mistake I think that Rails has made is to codify those early experiments and to say, okay, this is the way to do it. And then we're going to build on top of this and build on top of this until Rails has fallen into the trap, to some extent, of being, quote, it's falling into the same trap that enterprise software falls into. And then it's like massive and hard to turn, hard to steer. I think it would be a better bet if early on it had maybe re-examined some of its initial decisions and gone forward. So I think that's a form of mindfulness, and that's to do with being humble and realizing that you're never going to get it right, and you may as well just get used to the fact that you're going to fix mistakes going forwards all the time. There's another aspect of a mindful developer that's, I think, quite important. It's kind of interesting. Jez Hummel and I and Martin were on a panel in Denmark, and someone asked about flow, and I went off on a little rant, and I said, I personally think that this idea of a developer getting into a flow state is a really bad idea. Because when you're in a flow, the idea of flow is you get into this state where you're like hyper efficient and you're not thinking about anything else, and you kind of come out of it like out of a trance, and you go, oh, it's like an hour later, look how much I've done. The problem with that is that you are not exercising your higher level feedback functions on what you're doing. Right? To some extent, you have to break forward to look at what you just typed, or look at the decisions you just made. But sometimes this long rant about flow is actually, I think, the enemy of thinking. And Jez jumped in and said, absolutely, he was like, no, I'm going to say the same thing. I think being mindful means having that, splitting your brain into two. Right? Part of your brain is doing the work, and then part of the brain is criticizing that work. And if you can keep that kind of duality going and not get locked up, then I think you're in a really good state.
Last question.
Can you put agility and goals in perspective when working with legacy code, where you are doing a lot of code discovery and you don't see anything tangible coming out with those steps that you take towards the goal?
Yes, and I think it's actually as important, if not more important, when you're doing that kind of work. If you're doing greenfield development, then it's kind of like easy to get into this, you know the experiments with rats where they have a feeder tube, and if they pass some test, a little pellet comes out, and they do it again and again until they die. Oh, it's the same. That's what it's like quite often being a greenfield developer. And if you are a current orthodox developer, then your pellet is a little green bar that says you just passed. Right? If you're old school, then the pellet is the, oh look, I hit refresh and it came up on the screen, it's good. Right? Whatever it might be, that's the pellet that keeps you going, right? Over and over and over and over again. If you don't have those pellets, then you have to create them for yourself. And so if you're doing things like code discovery, you have to think very hard about, why am I doing this? What am I trying to do? What am I trying to achieve? And then that is your step, or your set of steps, right? So your first step might well be, I've got to find the source code, you know? And that would be an incremental step, and then take this small step. Did I do it? Have I done it? How do I tell if I've done it? Well, maybe I better try compiling it. Well, that's not going to work, but we'll see what happens. You know? And all these little small things contribute towards the steps. So in your head, you don't think about this as one big task that is, I need to understand the code so I can fix this bug. Instead, that may be the big goal, but you're going to break that down until every minute there's a little bit of a goal and a little bit of feedback that guides you, right? And you go around that loop, thinking about those little steps, and have I achieved them, have I not? Yeah. And not only will that stop you kind of going down rabbit holes, but it will also keep you going. It'll give you this idea of, yeah, I'm making progress. So I think it's really important when you're doing things that don't have direct, immediate feedback, to instead invent your own feedback, because that will really help you.
So the understanding of the code step by step does seem valuable as a developer, but to management it does not. So what's your perspective?
Get the code, print it out, put it on their desk, and say, here, you find it.
Thank you very much, Dave.
Thank you.